Yo, what's going on, Dragon Ballers? Welcome back to another Top Cut breakdown. In today's video, we're talking about 3 different tournaments that took place over the course of release weekend for Vermilion Bloodline. Lots of stuff and data to talk about with the release of the set, brand new format, so stay tuned for that. Guys, if you are new here, definitely subscribe, hit that bell so you don't miss a video. Go down in the description, there's 4 gajillion links there where you guys can help the channel out. It really does help out a lot. And go over to the community page, we are running a giveaway that is over next week, so make sure to enter that stuff, guys. Alright, with that being said, we will get right into the video. So I'm going to bring a graphic up here. I don't have my usual pie chart because there were just so many different tournaments to talk about. I wanted to just do it in this way. Not as clean as a list that Android usually makes, though. I got to get some graphic design tips from him. But anyways, let's get into it. So top 8 PPG, we had 3 Gotenks, 2 Invoker, 1 Vegex, 1 Bulma, and 1 Reboot Gohan. Top 8 New Jersey 1K, we had 4 Gotenks, 2 Majin Vegeta, 1 Vegex, and 1 Sin Shenron. Just by the way, all the Gotenks here are green, no yellow Gotenks in these top 8s. And then top 8 Virginia Beach case tournament, 4 Gotenks, 2 Red Broly, 1 Vegex, and 1 Sin Shenron. So a lot of similarities here. The main one, the craziest one that I really didn't expect was Gotenks to be so dominant. I mean, I'm just saying this because of numbers. I'm not saying this because I honestly believe it yet, but these Gotenks numbers are bordering tier 0 status. Like when you have 50% of a top 8 or near 50% of a top 8, that's where you get close to like tier 0 status. And I'm only saying that numbers wise. I'm not saying that because I think Gotenks is tier 0 yet. I mean, if we see this week after week after week after week, we might have to look at something there with Gotenks, but I really didn't expect it to take this form of dominance so early on in the format. But I guess when you're playing a deck that just does everything, I guess what can you expect, right? I mean, it's got hand control. That's inherently what green wants to do, and of course you're playing some number of rebrand punishing passions, but besides that, it's not as much of a hand control deck as we've seen with like Dredge Goku and Clash of Fates Goku. It's much more just like an all-around control deck. I mean, obviously the #1 offender is Gotenks Grim Reaper of Justice, 6-drop, fuse for 2 with a Goten and a Trunks. When it comes into play, draw 2 cards and pop a battle card, not to mention that the Gotens and Trunkses have their own effects when they're fused off. And then if that Gotenks is removed from the field, you get to both pick up a Goten and a Trunks. I mean, that card for 2 energy, 25k dual attack deflect, it's really insane. I mean, the thing with green here now is, and we'll talk about some more green decks as we go through this, is that now a lot of the threats in green have deflect, which is something that green struggled with a lot in prior formats. I mean, it hasn't really been very long that green has been meta. Green has been probably the most lacking color in DBS for the longest amount of time, but now since set 10, I mean, it was really strong with Dredge Goku and Clash Goku, but now in set 11, green has a lot of deflect threats, and deflect is kind of just a necessary evil in a sense because counterplay is so strong, and it has been since it really came out. I mean, you look back in the older days, you had like Denial of Hope, Preemptive Strike, Hidden Potential. Those cards were very powerful extra card counterplays that, you know, pretty much stopped anything 4 or less. And then when you played like a 5, 6, or 7 drop, those were generally more safe unless you ran into the problem of like Chomp of the Trickster, Mutaito, Crusher Ball, things like that. But now we have cards like Godsling Technique Trunks, and that is such a format warping card in a sense. I'm not saying you have to play cards to beat it necessarily, but it makes deflect battle cards so much stronger. I do think that's one of the main upsides to Gotenks. And, you know, since Dormant Potential Unleashed came out, green is definitely not very flexible with its energy. I would say that green and red definitely have issues when it comes to, you know, having available energy on defense, because so many plays you want to make on offense consume a decent amount of your energy. But when you have a card like Dormant Potential Unleashed, that really does just mitigate a lot of those issues. Some of the Gotenks lists are actually playing the Zarbon blocker from Tournament Pack 10, so that helps them get around a few things. One, it eats up the second attack after a Dormant Potential Unleashed, so that your opponent's turn is pretty much over. Also adds a little bit of hand control when it is KO'd. But other than that, it actually really helps against the S4 Vegeta matchup, because a recurrable blocker that you can just say every single turn, okay, your leader is never doing damage to my leader. And Gotenks does not care about having its leader attacked, because it's going to awaken when you drop the 2-drop unison, whether that's Bardock you're playing or the SS3 Vegito. Whatever 2-drop green unison you're playing, Gotenks will awaken, get to that 6 life minimum, and then from there it just plays its game, right? Like, Gotenks does not care what your opponent does. I will say it's a good thing that the leader has to attack. I mean, we could have had a situation here like, you know, Surge Piccolo, where, you know, you don't really care what your opponent does and you never have to interact with your opponent. At least Gotenks has to interact with the opponent, but this comes back to what I was saying before, where it's not really just a hand control deck like green has been in the past. It's much more than that. It does a lot. Again, that 2-drop 25k dual attacker is very, very aggressive, and you can spam that turn after turn after turn because the Gotenks and the Gotenks and Trunkses, they're just so easy to find. I mean, Goku rather, is such an insane search card for the deck. I mean, the deck really does have everything going for it. And we didn't see a lot of Gotenks' bad matchups here. I mean, it's tough to have a bad matchup when, you know, you don't necessarily lose to removal, you don't necessarily lose to aggro. You can lose out to certain, you know, other control decks that, you know, for example, like an Android 17 Turning the Tide, but even then you have Frieza Charismatic Villain to help with that. And for those longer games, you know, you can lean into your rebrands to rip their hand apart. The deck just does everything. I don't think we'll see this trend going forward. I really do think the format will kind of figure itself out. I do think there are decks out there that can beat Gotenks, which is actually kind of funny. One of those decks, for example, being Red Gogeta, because, you know, green just has straight removal and Red Gogeta does not lose to straight removal. You can't KO their 6-drop. So with that being the case, that might be a deck that actually surges up and beats Gotenks, but we'll have to see as time goes on. I don't expect this to continue, but if it does, we might actually have a tier 0 Gotenks on our hands, which is kind of funny to think about, to be honest. So next up, we're talking about the 2s here. We have 2 Invoker. Invoker, once again, I've talked about it before. Invoker is one of those decks that it has to just, you know, adapt to its environment. Invoker does very powerful things, a lot of which can't really be interacted with. I mean, the burn damage is hard for certain decks to interact with. You do have blue that can bounce the Rival Seeker Goku back to hand with Trunks Godsling technique, and you do have green that can just pop the Rival Seeker with Charismatic Villain. But for yellow and the other colors, it's a little bit tougher to interact with that combo. And then of course you have the Victory Strike, which is just a menace on its own. You have to have your extra card counterattacks, and sometimes you also have to have your drop area negates as well, because if, you know, you only have one answer to Victory Strike or one answer to burn, their leader just looks at your hand, picks it out, and, you know, tells you basically, sorry, not sorry, you're dead, right? So Invoker is in that type of spot. I think dedicated players of Invoker will see success in a format like this. It just seems like one of those decks that if you know what you're doing, if you know how to defend properly, and if you have a strategy for some of the more aggressive decks, I think you'll actually do pretty well with it. So next up, 2 Majin Vegeta. This deck is one of those decks that people look at and they say this is a hyper aggressive strategy, it'll do well in the beginning of the format, and later on it might fall off. I did just post my Majin Vegeta list early last week if you guys want to check it out. It's a bit more of a mid-range strategy. These were very, very aggressive decks though, but I do think Majin Vegeta can pivot, so I don't really expect to see it fall out of the meta too much. I think it'll be one of those decks like we've seen with Yellow Gotenks, like we've seen at Shin Shenron. I think it'll have success here and there. I think some weeks it won't necessarily be in top cut. I think in some weeks it will be in top cut. But it is another one of those decks that just does one thing, but it does it very powerfully, in the sense that you drop the Majin Buu chain, the Majin Buu Royal Absorption chain, and that's a very, very cheap chain to drop in terms of energy. So you can do that as early as turn 2 if you want to be hyper aggressive, but you can lean back, do it turn 4, and actually get a little bit of hand rip in there with a Dark Broly Unison, with the Demigod that searches out your parasitic Dragon Ball. So you have a lot of options there. I do think Majin Vegeta is quite strong, pretty cool to see in the top cut. 2 Red Broly, I don't think anyone's surprised. If anything, people I think might be surprised at the fact that it's not topping quite as much as they thought. But I think this is one of those decks that's victim to its promo, in the sense that TP11 just came out this weekend, and in Red Broly, you really need for the Astonishing Potential Broly to, you know, have the most success with the deck. I saw a few people, especially the top 8 New Jersey tournament, playing it without the promo, and it's just not worth it in my opinion. It's not as consistent, it's not as powerful. That Broly getting that bot, even though it crits you a life, it's honestly one of the best cards in the deck. Making sure you have the Broly you need when you need it is just way too powerful to pass up. Makes your Planet Vampa more consistent. So that being the case, I think Red Broly is going to be a little bit tough to play unless you get those TP promos. Now, the 2 Red Broly players here were part of Max Rarity Gaming, and they're no joke when it comes to getting cards on release. They'll get the cards they need to play the most competitive deck they want to play, and that's pretty much that. So Red Broly, super strong, very aggressive. If you don't have the proper answers for it, it's going to be relatively tough to beat. So next up, we have the ones here. So 1 Vegex in each of the tournaments played this weekend. 1 at PPG, 1 at NJ, and 1 at VA. So I didn't really expect this, to be honest. I did not think Vegex would consistently hit one spot in each of these top 8s, but it did. It seems like Vegex is still pretty aggressive. Again, I do think that new Vegeta Super Combo in set 11 straight up replaces Bibbidi. I'm not sure if each of these lists played it or if they played Bibbidi, but I would imagine they did, because in my head at least, it's just the strict replacement to this card, right? To Bibbidi, which is now nerfed. I don't think there's much of a reason to play it, but besides that, I mean, Vegex leader, we've talked about it many times. it provides so much free value that it's hard to beat, to be honest. Like, when your leader inherently says, you know, draw one card because the leader inherently draws one, and then, you know, you have a chance to draw one more, you have a chance to draw two more, you have a chance to draw three more, but, you know, they get played to the field instead for putting on pressure, for comboing, for setting up your unison. It is just a really powerful deck in general. So definitely not surprised, but maybe a little surprised just to see the consistency here. We'll see as the weeks go on if it continues to top. One Bulma, I will have this deck list on the channel this week, so stay tuned for that. Just super defensive deck. Not a ton of aggro here though, especially at the event that it topped, which was the PPG event. PPG was a lot more mid-range and control, a decent slew of aggro as well. So Bulma in an environment of that, it's pretty cool to see that it succeeded when realistically its best matchup is probably aggro, but in a field, a very mixed field with control, mid-range, that type of thing. Very cool to see Bulma top there. Then we have one Reboot Gohan, a top 8 PPG as well. Reboot Gohan, no surprise there. You will definitely see it here and there at tournaments. It's just a very powerful deck. The leader-based aggression is tough to deal with. And then two Sin Shenron, one at NJ, one at VA. I will have the VA deck list on the channel as well, so stay tuned for that. This deck got a lot of cool upgrades in set 11. One being the Ice Shenron that basically searches any of your negative energy Dragon Balls, so that's definitely a strong addition to the deck there as well. But overall, guys, was very surprised by the amount of dominance that Gotenks seemed to put on here this weekend. We'll have to monitor that as we go forward, see how the deck does continuing. If you have a strategy that beats Gotenks, let us know in the comments below what you're playing, because players are going to need that going forward. But anyways, very cool stuff. Glad to cover the first, you know, weekend of tournaments for the format. Let me know in the comments below what you think, and I will see you guys next time.